Hi, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to talk to you about AI multi-agents and how you can deliver an autonomous SecOps system using collaborative agents. I'm Brian P. Murphy. I'm Chief Scientist at ReliaQuest, and I also have with me.
Jonathan Echavarria. I'm Principal Research Scientist, also at ReliaQuest.
Okay, just to be aware of, your audio will be muted for the duration of this webinar. Please ask questions in the Q&A box throughout the presentation, and we'll be able to follow up with you via email afterwards. So I want to go over a quick agenda before we get started here. One thing we're going to start talking about is agentic concepts and definitions, kind of where things are today. And then we're going to talk about why collaborative agents are very important, where things are going. We'll talk about how they work, what they can achieve, and why they work the way they do, and why they're built the way they do. And then we'll talk through some use cases around collaborative agents, such as responding to threat intel releases, an employee offboarding use case, and some bird's eye view of your security posture. Really going to keep you through the gamut of collaborative agents as opposed to regular agents. So as we're talking about regular agents, I'll hand over to Jonathan to talk through kind of what the current state of the art is.
Yeah. So before we really dive into the whole multi-agent architecture and infrastructure and all of the benefits that this can bring to your SecOps, we really got to understand what agents even are. Whenever we refer to agents, we're typically referring to, for the most part, it's just a large language model and a combination of that with the ability for that model to interact with tools and the orchestration behind that, right? So if you think about that, those are the four parts of it. If you also add in prompting to that as well, because the orchestration is essentially the workflow of how the agent works and what it's actually doing. The tools that it's interacting with enable that workflow. The LLM takes in the prompts and then kind of mixes it all together. So by combining these concepts, you really enable a model to move beyond just generating text and actually contextualize and analyze things within an environment. So if we think about how people are using the agents of today, right? There's really two big primary methods, and sometimes these single agent architectures rely on a combination of both. On the left-hand side, you see an example of what's called a plan and execute agent. This is a very popular agentic architecture. It's commonly used for most services or agents that are actually doing a thing. A lot of code generation agents utilize this sort of infrastructure. And essentially what it is the user prompts it and says, hey, agent, I want you to do a thing, and it'll analyze that task. Then based off of that task and all of the context around the environment it has, for example, oh, I have a tool to edit a file. I have a tool to read a file. I have a tool to create a file. Based off of those tools and the task that I'm looking at, I'm going to go ahead and formulate that plan. It'll execute that plan, and then within a loop, look at the results, update the plan, and continue until it's complete. The other concept of agents and how they do this might also use things like this concept called self-reflection, right? And this is very similar in the sense that it receives a task and then it just does things and executes tasks in order to complete the goal. But after each execution, it'll stop and think and reflect, okay, I did these things so far. The goal isn't done yet. Now I'm going to do this next step. And really the difference is, at the end of the day, did we write a plan from the beginning and then just followed that to the T? Or are we just doing things and looking at the results of that and then determining whether or not we hit our goal? There's some problems with this kind of architecture though. When you have a single agent and it's so solely focused on doing one thing, LLMs have this concept called attention. Attention is a really sciencey term that at the end of the day just describes how and what the model is focusing on. Because as you narrow a model's thoughts into things, it restricts what the available next token is going to be. So at the end of the day, if I'm thinking about the word apple, but I just had a sentence that was about food, then it's most likely or most probable that the model is going to think about food related terms instead of Apple, the company related terms. So by having a single agent thinking about things in one way, it can tend to over focus on a single objective. because of that, right, that actually goes into the next pitfall where replanning ability is kind of short for that. Because it's very hard for a single agent with all of the context of only the things that it's doing to actually take a step back and reevaluate things unbiasedly because it's biased by all of the actions and context that it had, which ultimately implies our last pitfall to mention here, right? Is that like they will fail to consider alternative approaches. As a result, sure, a single purpose agent might be good at doing one particular thing, but having it come up with complex solutions or creative solutions is where, you know, these single agent architectures tend to struggle. So to improve that, we come up with this concept of, and I'll pass it back to Brian.
We're talking about collaborative agents. So this is how we move forward and how we move beyond that kind of single focused track agent of that's kind of plan and execute or single tasked agents that are quite successful at solving those simple kind of linear tasks. When we think about more complicated tasks, tasks that may require different disciplines to solve in a collaborative manner, that single agent, that single plan and execute agent approach really falls over due to some of the problems that Jonathan talked about. If you think about, hey, if you're trying to pivot between threat research and IR in a single agent, that becomes very problematic in terms of how that agent can approach the task. When we're looking at, say, trying to do something operationally and doing IR or doing something threat hunting at the same time, sometimes those agents can get confused about what they should be doing if it's all lumped in together. So we really want to make sure to enable that kind of complex problem solving. We also want to scale out their knowledge. Like, as you've seen, like talking about attention, we also have the problem of the context, where a single call to an LLM only has can only fit a certain amount of context into the context window. So you're going to only put a certain amount of knowledge that isn't in the model into the prompt. And that really impacts trying to do multiple things at once, where you want to have all the context from the conversation, all the context from everything that's already been done, and then also try and give you the context of the problem. We're trying to really scale that out across different branches of knowledge. That's a lot, poses a lot of problems to that single agent approach. And then when you're trying to get the consistent performance, a lot of times in that single agent approach, the order of operations can really impact the performance of it. If you do threat intel and then do another, say, then do threat research or IR, or do IR and then do threat research for second, the performance can vary wildly. And also that transparent reasoning can be hard to access when you're in that single agent. It's kind of hard to figure out exactly why it thought what it did, because it gets kind of confused with all those different context switching involved in the single agent. So you really want to split these agents up into multiple different types of agents that can be orchestrated together. And that really allows you to exhaustively cover all your problem areas and all the use cases you need to do. And also it lets them get better, right? It also lets them get better individually. So you don't necessarily need your IR agent to get better at doing threat research, and vice versa. You don't need your threat intel agent to get really good at doing operational things. So you want them to get better at the tasks that they're actually applied to. So we think about this in terms of, especially that improvement of knowledge is skills. So you'll think about the single agents, and you hear a lot about MCP and tool calling. And that involves, hey, here, these are tools that an agent can use or tools that an LLM can use. But how those LLMs, how the agent uses those tools to actually get the outcomes are what we call skills. For example, hey, how do you decode PowerShell correctly? How do you search data repositories like SIMs or data lakes? Like, running the initial search is fine, but how do you actually achieve meaning from those searches? How do you achieve meaning from the PowerShell? How do you reset the credentials in the right way? So moving beyond the simple tool call to an actual outcome involving that tool to get at the actual skill. And one of the good things is that, hey, if those skills are shareable across different agents, you can actually share the skills across different agents. So here you can see that we have various different skills that can be shared or can be composited into these different personaed agents. So you can basically construct these agents depending on the appropriate need for the given task. So thinking about, hey, what skills does my IR agent needs? What skills does my threat analyst need? These are different skills that they need together. So let's the AI focus on actually achieving the outcome for that persona. And that persona then can embody that person within your organization, an embodiment of a person, basically, that security architect or that risk analyst that's really good at that one thing. That persona doesn't have to be great at everything, but we can really be focused, and we can take advantage of some of those problems with the signal agent plan and execute or self-referential, in that they get very hyper-focused on their problem space. And that's exactly what we want here, right? We want those single personaed agents to get really good at being security architect, or being really good at being a risk analyst. So this allows us to introduce another agent on top of all these. And this is what we call the SOC director. So this is a special orchestrating agent that can delegate the different tasks to different personas. And what that means is it's kind of like that guy who sits in the middle. It's the manager, the quarterback, if you will, of all these agents, that basically can divvy out the tasks, receive responses from them, and actually then can call another agent. For example, you might be doing a threat analyst, and it may find a threat. It may then hand that threat off to the threat researcher to say, hey, go find me things about this threat. It may find it hand it off to the threat hunter and say, hey, did we see this in our environment already? It may hand it off to the operations engineer to say, hey, operationally, I want to impact this threat. I want to isolate the IP or something like that, or ban the hash, or do something in resolving this threat. And it's because you have that SOC director in the middle that can coordinate all these together, each of these agents can still remain focused on their individual tasks, while you still have that one person or one persona in the middle, which can then receive all the inputs, coordinate the outputs to each individual one, and then be an interface that the user or the system uses to actually action tasks within the system. So let's branch off and let's start talking about some use cases here. And I'll hand it off to Jonathan to walk us through the first one.
Right. So as security professionals, this happens to everyone at some point in their life. It's Friday night, you're relaxing, and then you get a phone call or a notification, and it's like, hey, this latest hack just happened. It's pretty bad, and we need you guys to react to it and do everything. In this case, an Iranian cyber actor was launching a new massive campaign. Here's all of the IOCs. CEO calls you up and basically says, I'm getting questions from the board. What can we do to ensure that we're protected against this? How can we prepare for this threat? How can we demonstrate to the market that we're, protected? And if you think about the analogy between our multi-agent infrastructure and really how an actual SOC operates, as you see how our agentic approach, kind of helps with this problem, there'll be a lot of parallels between human approaches to our problem solving and then agentic approaches to the problem solving. So that report gets released, and the first thing that you would do, right, is hey, let's go talk to the SOC director agent. Look at this report. Pull out the IOCs from it. We need to know, are we vulnerable? What's our impact? What's our exposure to this? So if you think back to those personas that Brian mentioned, right, that SOC director would then look at that task, going back to that plan and execute style thing, decompose all of the different agents that need to be pulled in. So in this case, the SOC director might pull in a threat hunter to the team. We're going to make a team of everyone that needs to be involved in order for us to be able to answer this question for the organization. We're going to pull in an IR analyst. We're going to pull in a threat researcher. We're going to pull in a security architect. So for each individual one, right, they will all kind of have their own tasks. And the SOC director looks at the abilities of those personas, the skills that they have, and determines what are they best suited for in order to answer questions based off of, this particular task, looking at the report. So a threat hunter might say, okay, I'm going to go look back at our environment, look at any previous incidents that we have. Based off of these IOCs, were any of them ever present in our environment? Have we ever seen any indicators of exposure to this? The IR analyst, right, might say, okay, did we have any incidents involving these IOCs? And based off of the results of now that we know that they are malicious, were they actioned appropriately, or were they benign? A threat researcher might look at the environment and say, and it might look at our intel feed. Do we even have the visibility for these IOCs in our feed, right? If it's an IP address, are we able to collect IP address information and use that in an actionable way? If it's a domain, can we do whois lookups and utilize that within our environment, right? what information do we know about the threat actor that's mentioned inside of this report that we're analyzing? And finally, a security architect, right? Like having the skill or ability to look at and understand how the infrastructure is set up, what detections are in place, what logging mechanisms are in place. Do we have the content and ability to even detect these indicators that we're receiving from this attack? So each agent goes out after getting their individual tasks, run their task, collect their report, compile their report, and answer the individual question that the SOC director tasked each one with. Now the SOC director, looks at that output and starts reviewing it. And then we'll assign follow-on tasks. So for example, an IR analyst will, use its skill here, which is, the incident analysis, right? To reopen any and rework any misclosed tickets. That skill is specifically made in a way to help it guide through how to investigate an incident based off of whatever is unique for this environment, right? Like, and that's really the core and critical difference between the abilities that our agents receive versus just the ability for it to call a tool. Because it's one thing for it to like collect all of the information from a given incident ID, like, oh, okay, I see that these artifacts are available. So I guess that this happened, versus the skill, which is whenever you're looking at an incident, let's go through this process and, this is our standard of investigation and this is what we require you to do. So the IR analyst can, based off of the follow-on tasks that the director dishes out, can make use of that and kind of work through that. Going back to the operational engineer, right? Hey, I have access to, interact with our firewalls. That skill in that case is going to be the ability for it to do things like in the firewalls, let's look at our ban list. Let's add those IP addresses to the block lists. Throughout our EDRs, let's add those hashes to our EDR block lists, right? And then, the security architect would have the skill in order to create new detection mechanisms. This is proactive security within your environment, just based off of those follow-up tasks that come out from not only can we determine what our exposure to this new threat report that came out with, but we can also demonstrate what we did proactively to ensure that we are protected from this in the future, regardless of whether we were exposed to this incident or not. We proactively retroactively searched our environment to look for any indicators that were present, that were mentioned in this report. We ensured that we have the ability to detect the tactics and techniques within this report. And if we didn't, we made changes to our environment or suggested changes to do so in order to help strengthen our overall security posture. At the end of this, SOC director reviews all of the output and finally generates that final report to you, the user who originally asked the question. And now you're able to go back to the board with the solid answer of, hey, all right, we understand that this threat report came out. We are protected against it, or we weren't, but now we are. We looked back in our environment. We determined everything, that we didn't encounter this, or we did. And if we did, then, here's what we did about it. So I'll go to our next use case, and I'll hand that to Brian.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So next one use case I want to talk about is one that's near and dear to my heart, but in general, I feel like is one of the unique insider risks that's posed to companies. And one of the ones that is really that kind of what we call that low brain but high effort, and like a lot of effort to get a minimal reward, but when it actually works out, it's very, very important to do. So if you think about that onboarding, offboarding event, it's one of those times where the user is in flux, right? They're either coming on board and maybe they're a state actor, or maybe they're a threat actor, or maybe there's somebody who's like just wants to see what they can find in your environment before they leave, because they're offboarding, or they want to take their client list with them, or they want to take your source code with them. They want to take those assets out, or they want to, as they leave, or they're planted in there by say North Korea, which is unfortunately, more and more we're seeing that, hey, people are joining companies from these state actors even to perform corporate espionage. And I really think that it's a lot of work because there's so many benign users here, right? Most people do not pose an insider threat. Most people are, when they're offboarding, they're more concerned about themselves than they are about the corporate espionage. And most people, when they're onboarding, they're excited to start at a new company. They really want to learn the environment, sure, but they're not thinking in terms of maliciousness. And because of that kind of dichotomy between, hey, there's a very small minority of malicious users versus a very large majority, maybe 99% of or more of users are actually very benign. I think there's a lot of the times security teams don't focus as much as they should on the onboarding and offboarding events, right? I think it's easy to forget about them. It's easy to think, hey, we shouldn't do that just because it takes so much time to actually make an impact here. Because hey, we've done this 100 times, and every time we did it, it was benign. Why do we keep doing it and wasting time? The reality of the situation is, hey, you probably should be doing this all the time, but it's a perfect use case for collaborative agents. It's really important to make sure that, hey, people don't have access to things once they're terminated. And maybe make sure that, hey, when people are in their role, they're not accessing things they shouldn't be accessing as they start. So the SEC director can be informed by different ways, right? So it could be the matter of, hey, somebody logging in and saying, hey, Mr. SOC director, this person is offboarded. Please perform an insider threat. It could be hooked into your Workday use case, for example, so that they can actually, or whatever system you're using to manage your employee onboarding and offboarding. So that automatically, whenever anybody's onboarded, 30 days after that, and you want to say, hey, I want to know, are they an insider threat? Or hey, this person is just about to be offboarded or has just been offboarded. I want to know if they were an insider threat. So you need to think about, hey, what tasks and what skills do we need? What personas do I need to actually address those risks? So one of the things that you might think about doing is, like, say the SOC director is like, hey, okay, and think about me, for example. I'm P Murphy at ReliaQuest because I wasn't the first Brian Murphy. I'm also BPM at ReliaQuest. So a threat hunter has to know that and has to search for any assets that I have accessed or whatever I've done in the last 30 days. So the skill is not just, hey, saying taking and searching just straight for P Murphy. It also has to know all the different identities I have within the organization, right? So it has to know that I'm BPM at ReliaQuest, I'm P Murphy at ReliaQuest, I'm ReliaQuest / P Murphy in some systems. It has to know all these different ways of addressing me so that it can actually say, hey, what have I done in the last 30 days? The operations engineer has the same problem. Hey, I want to reset all those credentials, so terminate all sessions. I want to make sure that everything that they had access to, they no longer have access to. Or hey, I want to know what they have been, what access they have. And the IR analyst wants to say, hey, were there any incidents that have any artifacts related to this user, their host name, their IP address, their username, or anything that they were doing that may have impacted some incidents that may give us a hint that, hey, yeah, they were an insider threat and we didn't notice it, but there's a pattern here. There's maybe, hey, yeah, we warned them that they shouldn't be downloading this things from SharePoint, but then 2 days later they decide to offboard. And hey, that's something you really want to know about from all these agents. So if you think about that then that the threat hunter goes back and it runs that search. And the skill is not just saying, hey, yes, I have a search. Oh, here, there's 500,000 rows of logs with P Murphy or BPM in them. So you have to know how to process those, know how to extract the meaning from those logs. And that's really a skill in of itself. And it's a skill that can be shared from the threat hunter, and an IR analyst probably needs that skill of how to process those logs, how to look for the patterns in them and look for the log sources. Like, hey, I want to look at your file access logs. I want to know and see what you've been accessing. I want to say, look at your email logs. I want to know who you've been emailing. Are all your emails internal? That's probably not indicative of insider threat. Have you been emailing a lot externally, maybe to something that looks like your own email address or some random email address with a lot of attachments? Then that's much more indicative of an insider threat. Hey, the operations engineer has to know how to reset credentials. Like, hopefully everybody's running single sign-on. That doesn't actually always log everybody out of everything. It may terminate you from your interactive sessions, but is that terminating, hey, any API keys you have? Making sure that, hey, anything that you have, maybe you've generated an API key for your source control system. has that also been validated? Hey, do you have access to things that maybe weren't on single sign-on that you have access to? Making sure that, hey, that operations engineer can reset all those credentials. And once again, that the skill becomes very, very important. And that IR analyst, it's not just, hey, looking at, hey, analyzing a single incident. It's looking back over the broad swath of incidents to actually see, hey, where was this user involved? Or was there IP involved? Or was there something that connects them to any incidents that we've seen in the last 30 days? So that's obviously a ton of work for humans to do. It really is, right? And like I said at the start, this is something that I feel like not enough people do. We just had a new hire class here, and we had over almost 150 people in our monthly new hire class. That's a lot of work to try and do, to try and task your security team with trying to run these kind of insider threat risks on all these people that are onboarding. And I don't think security teams really have the bandwidth to do it. And I really think you have to leverage these kind of agentic frameworks to do so. So once you've generated this, you can then generate that report, right? That can be shared with the internal security and the manager of the terminated employee. It can be shared with HR, just saying, hey, look, this person was onboarded 30 days ago. Here's what they've accessed. Yes, and the agentic framework, the SOC director has decided, hey, this is a bit weird. Maybe you want to go talk to them and talk to their manager. Hey, figure out, hey, why were they doing this? Maybe, hey, if it is somebody that's just been terminated, you want to talk to them and say, hey, look, your severance package depends on you signing something saying you deleted everything that deleted all these things. We are aware that you have pulled all this. We are aware that, hey, you maybe emailed it to yourself. We want to be able to verify that this hasn't escaped our environment, that we know that you have done this. And that's typically enough. Once people kind of get caught with their hand in the cookie jar, that for the vast majority of people is enough to stop them moving forward or doing anything else with that. But once again, it's that really that low brain, high effort work that it's really stressful to think about. Hey, if you turn to your security team saying, hey, we're having some layoffs, we need you to go and do insider threat on 100 people. I think that's a very hard thing to tell your security team to do when they're still trying to deal with all the tickets that they're trying to deal with. We're still trying to deal with the regular usage of their security team, where they actually have their day-to-day tasks to take care of. So this is one of the great use cases, I think, for these collaborative agents. And it's not something a single agent can do, because each of these different skills and each of these different tasks requires a different skill set and a different persona to analyze in a different way. So the next use case, I'll hand off to John again, is thinking about a bird's eye view of security incidents.
So we've seen how these multi-agent architectures can, react to threat reports that are kind of coming in, how they can be proactive within the environment of, something happens within the environment. For example, a user is offboarded, an incident is triggered. But the other part of this, right, is that because they are multi-agents, they're capable of handling a much wider amount of context itself. So that means that we can start doing bigger analysis of things, right? So as a security executive, I understand that in order to explain, are we improving? Is our security posture improving? Are we reducing risk ultimately? That there's really a need to move beyond agents just being able to look at a single event or a single incident. And ultimately, as a security leader, I need to be able to explain what's happening within my environment. If you think about the process of actually collecting that information now and organizing it, right, it's very manually involved. Someone has to go through and collect all of the data that we have to look at. Then they have to curate that data and extract the actual narratives of what's relevant, what's not relevant, what sort of indicators is the data that we're collecting and trying to measure our actual enterprise's growth with is relevant. But that's where these multi-agents can also kind of come in and help with that, right? And if you think about this could be done scheduled. This could be a one-time thing. Hey, every month I want you to provide me a report and look back at all of the incidents that have happened within our environment. Are we improving? Compare that to last month's report. Is there any gaps that we haven't addressed? Are there new gaps that have been introduced? So we're tasking the SOC director with providing an executive summary from all of the data and security data that we have available within our platform. thinking about the sort of skills that would need to be involved with that, right? Like looking at our personas, we can pull out a IR analyst. The IR analyst has all of the context for investigating the incidents. They know how to contextualize that. That's what's relevant for their skill. So over the past week, we'll have it look at all of the incidents that were worked and then look for connections or patterns that kind of link those together. That helps tell the bigger narrative of what's happening within our environment and how are we doing. If you pull in a threat analyst or threat researcher persona, it has access to all of the threat reports that's come out. It has the ability to query our threat intel data. It looks for connections related to known threats that we encounter, unknown threats that have just come out over the past week or last time we've actually ran this report, and can help raise information about the actual threat profile or threat exposure of the organization in a different way than the IR analyst would, which ultimately is measuring the security hygiene of our incidents and our capability to do incidents. And then finally, going back to that IR analyst, it's comparing the delta of how we've grown and contextualizing and putting that all into like a very solid and cohesive narrative. So taking the outputs from all of those agents, right? We make a unified report. And at that point, it could be a scheduled task. Every week, you as a security leader get that on Monday, fresh piece of paper with your coffee. And you're prepared immediately for any sort of meeting that you want. These multi-agents and them collaborating and being able to use these skills really makes them adaptive at being able to handle any sort of task. So the architecture of this, where we're looking at this just from like a security analysis perspective, is one thing, but like ultimately multi-agent architecture can take us a lot further. And with that, I'll hand it back to Brian.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I think that's really important. I know I could have used one of those reports multiple times in my career where I get an awkward question on a Monday morning. It's like, hey, where are we with security? What happened last week? It's always useful it'd be really useful to be able to just point to a report and say, hey, this is exactly what happened, rather than telling my team to drop everything and go generate a report for the CEO. So hopefully now you understand how collaborative agents work and where we've come from single plan and execute or single task focused agents into the kind of future of using collaborative agents to generate personaed agents that have shared skills that can actually achieve much more complex outcomes than a single agent can. And really, I think that this is the future for agentic AI and how AI in the future is going to deliver, how you're going to interact with AI. You're going to be able to talk to an AI that's going to be able to dispatch tasks to other agents and deliver really complicated outcomes, much far beyond a simple IR, which is not so simple, but I guess these days it's not even magic anymore. It feels like a lot of times that we're delivering things that were unbelievable 10 years ago. I really think that we were able to deliver something amazing right now, and in the future, as we deliver collaborative agents, the use cases here are going to be absolutely fantastic. I just want to move on to some questions and answers, but I do want to cover some of the common questions that we get. And submit your questions, and we'll get back to you via email. But I definitely want to cover some of the more frequently answered questions we get. And one of the major ones is, how do you avoid hallucinations and incorrectness? And I think one of the key things here is that it tends to be a lot easier to check for an hallucination than it does to generate the response, right? Making sure that, hey, the response is grounded, and there's different techniques for doing grounding. Some of the ones that we've seen in our experience is using a lower model to say, hey, is the response based in the facts that came in? I think there's some really good ones. I think you've worked with some other architectures, Jonathan. I think there's a Melon one, that Anthropic, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Melon is a great architecture for actually avoiding like tool injections and issues with like tool execution. Anthropic's done some really good research on that. The Melon is actually a really good paper on that. To add on to your point about avoiding hallucinations and correctness, I actually think that goes back to, when we were talking about attention before and like having the models really overfocus or overfocus on a single train of thought. These multiple agents and multiple personas that are participating in the conversation, having them analyze the actual output as well, because they're all looking at it from different perspectives. We've noticed a pattern where that significantly tends to not even reduce hallucinations, but actually work towards eliminating incorrectness or in like not facts, you know?
No, agreed. I think the newer models tend to hallucinate a little bit less. But you still have to have those checkers. You still have to build in those hallucination checkers and avoid the incorrectness. The other question we get all the time as well is, hey, do you see this replacing humans? And I would say no. I see it augmenting. And I'm a very bad chess player. But in the chess world, there's this thing called it's kind of it's a centaur chess it's true now that an AI will crush any human grandmaster. But what will crush the AI is a human grandmaster and an AI working together. And I see this as the future for security. It's humans and AI working together to deliver the outcomes. And it's not replacing humans, but it's replacing a lot of that work that humans find very repetitive, and you have to get the same outcome all the time. For example, I think, hey, the analysis of, hey, what's my security posture? Doing that every week is honestly quite boring. You have to basically analyze as a human, analyzing all the incidents that came in, writing the report, making sure it's all makes sense. Is quite boring every week to do. It's a perfect task for an AI. Same with the onboarding or offboarding. Being able to do that kind of low brain, high effort work by AI, and then humans consume that and can make decisions based on it. What about you, Jonathan?
Really,
What do you think?
really opens the door for humans to be able to like focus less on doing the mundane and focus more on coming up with creative solutions, thinking through the problems more, right? And like I always will say that AI knows more than you do, and that's just generally true. It can consume the entirety of the internet, and it has access to more books and resources. But being able to contextualize that down to the problem that you, the human, are dealing with or tasking the AI system to resolve is something that, like, you know, isn't quite there yet, and we still need, you know, humans involved in the loop in order to do that. But when you work in tandem, right, like, and you ask these models, hey, like, what am I not considering here? Think about this from alternative perspectives. It allows you to come up with ultimately more creative solutions than, you know, a human would be able to on their own, especially because we're also taking away that mundanity.
Agreed. And then the last question I typically get an awful lot of is, hey, my environment and business operate different from everybody else. How do you tailor the agents and the agentic outcomes to you? And I think this comes into very much into that guidance that you're providing to the agents. I think alongside the skills you provide and the prompts involved there and all the promptings, you have to be able to provide the individual guidance for your environment or for your customer's environment, so that gets injected right at where it needs to be, typically at the SOC director and at the scale and the persona level, so that it can say, hey, for this, always do this, or hey, we this is our policies and procedures. So this is how we need to do things. And this can be achieved in different ways. You can create a RAG system that has all your policies and procedures in it, and have an agent that actually is, hey, a personaed agent that is your policies and procedures agent that can go out and, like, when the SOC director is kind of formulating a plan for thinking what to do, we can ask it first, and you can tell the SOC director, hey, always ask the policies and procedures agent to go first and create, hey, what policies and procedures are related to this use case. And that's one way of doing it, but being able to tailor the agents to your specific use case and to your specific environment is really important, because honestly, it's never a one size fits all. You have to be able to customize the outcomes for your individual environment. No place, especially no large enterprise, has exactly the same technologies, and we've seen that time and time again. You have to be able to customize and provide the same outcome, but with customization on top. So really, thank you for joining us today. I look forward to seeing your questions in email, and thank you from both myself and Jonathan.
Take care.